So I will introduce our moderator, Dan Harrison. He is our Senior Vice President of Benefits here at the Miller Group. He has 25 years of experience with employee benefit consulting, and he actually helped launch the employee benefit division here at the Miller Group. He specializes in strategically guiding clients through their employee benefit and retirement programs. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Dan.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everybody, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to sit through today's webinar. Obviously, the topic itself, attracting and retaining new employees, is it's a big topic of discussion that everybody seems to be struggling with. And I've seen across the country people are leaving the jobs in record numbers, where 4.3 Americans quit their jobs in August, and there was at the time 6.5 million jobs available at the time. So this is it's an issue that we're all dealing with, and we've got a great panel today that's going to kind of share with you some of their experiences, and hopefully you'll be able to leave the meeting with some fresh ideas and things that might be able to help you as in your companies as you look to try to bring on new talent. We're fortunate to have three panelists today. We have Katie Hull. Katie is the co-founder of TalentFund. They're a professional placement and recruitment service firm based in Kansas City, Missouri. TalentFund serves mid-market, growing companies across a number of different industries. They just connect talent each individual companies. We also have John Copeland. John is Senior Vice President and Managing Director for Hecht Harrison's Midwest Division, and has P&L responsibility for their offices from Pennsylvania to Colorado. Hecht Harrison partners closely with global, national, and local companies to improve business results through leadership development, employee engagement, and change management and career transition. And then finally, we have Missy Ragsdale. Missy is Director of HR and a principal of the Populous Group. Populous is an international architecture and planning firm with more than 500 employees, with offices based here in Kansas City, but also in London and Australia. Missy has a strong background in HR and has worked with Populous for a number of years, and has the pleasure, and I've had the pleasure of working with Missy for a number of years. She is a client of the Miller Group. So that's the list of our panelists. I think I will try to just moderate, maybe throw out the questions and let our panelists kind of jump in and answer it, if you will. And we'll start out. And I think Amanda had mentioned, if you have a question that maybe we haven't addressed, that you can ask that through the chat line. We'll try to get to all your questions, but we'll hopefully answer many of those as we go through this conversation. So I'll just kind of start out with our panelists and ask if there's, why are there so many companies are having a hard time filling their positions? What are some of the biggest issues that they're dealing with right now?
Thanks, Dan. This is Katie Hull, and I'll jump in and then let John and Missy weigh in as well. I think one thing we're hearing a lot of in the news is the Great Resignation. I think you can also frame that up as the Great Realization. And we have seen a lot of our clients struggle in maintaining existing employee base and attracting new employees, because there's an onset of people really evaluating what do they want in their careers. Some of that comes in the form of flexible work environments, hybrid, their schedules. But really what we're seeing is a pretty big shift in what people are looking for in their employment and how they're spending their time. And that's a number of different factors. Hopefully we'll get into some of the nitty gritty about what those factors are and what they might mean for some of you all on the call, as far as compensation and work schedules, and how do you attract and keep the right people in place when there's so many different considerations. So I think it's really what we've seen from the recruitment side and the middle market clients that we're working with is just kind of a shakeup, really. And initially, I think a lot of folks thought that shakeup would kind of even out once maybe some of those unemployment benefits ended. And we're really seeing that there's not an end in sight. And so it's really about, how do employers respond? How are they marketing themselves as an employer brand? And how are they listening to and reacting in the appropriate manner to the needs of not only current, but future employees?
I'll jump in, Katie. I would echo a lot of what Katie said. In addition to that, what I would say is what we're experiencing, and I think I said this in a call last week, it's a little bit of the wanderlust and the disenchantment with what people are doing now. Some people are shifting their careers entirely. So we've seen a couple of architects who they may still be doing architecture work, but it's not going to be the same kind of architecture work that they've been familiar with what we're doing. Plus, we're hearing from recruiters and our internal recruiter, there are people who are just totally leaving the industry that they've been part of just to do something they've dreamt about doing for a long time. So, it is a big challenge, and we have not experienced the Great Resignation to the point where you read a lot about it. But what we have seen is that people are seeking things from a cultural standpoint or from a standpoint of expanding their career or shifting careers entirely. So it hasn't been a great resignation, but it's been more than the usual that we would see around this time.
Yeah, and I'll build on what Katie and Missy mentioned. And by the way, hey everybody, and nice to meet you. Thanks for taking the time. So I'll just talk for a minute, because a lot of these things we're going to be talking about today are kind of a mixture of the difficulty in bringing talent on board and then the difficulty of retaining talent. So I'll just touch on initially, at least, the difficulty that you all may be having in acquiring talent. And there's many reasons, but I kind of, in my mind, try to simplify things. And to me, it kind of boils down into three areas. One is there is a low labor force participation right now. It's lower than pre-pandemic rates. And there's lots of reasons for that. Things like, there's a high burnout right now for people in the workforce. People have been working in the past 18 months, over 40 hours a week. And there's a lot of burnout issues, mental health issues that we're actually helping companies with. Also, people's personal issues, family kind of has risen to the top, right? Especially if you have young children and in the school, situations. Things like, I think Katie mentioned, unemployment benefits, federal unemployment benefits. That was a big issue. I think it's going to be less and less since a lot of that has run out. But to give you an example, one of our big clients on the outplacement side of our business about 4 months ago was having to reduce their frontline workforce, and this is a retail client, by about 4,500 people. So a pretty good, reduction in force at the front line. And this firm is one that thinks a lot about their people and their culture and their employment brand. So they offer them certain benefits. And one was an outplacement program for these 4,500 people. Only 29% of those people offered the outplacement program actually utilized services. And you have to consider, these are retail level folks. And that was at the same time that they were getting the federal stimulus, and they were just unemployment benefits. And quite frankly, I think they were making more not working, at that level. So that shouldn't be a problem now entering the workforce, as I mentioned, but at that particular time it was. So that's number one, just kind of this labor force participation. The other two are a skill shortage and then just a hot market. So, there's a large skill shortage for certain higher in demand skills in the marketplace, typically more like technical skills, digitization, digital marketing, coding, those types of things. It's really hard to find talent. There's many other, positions that are in low supply, high demand. But that's another reason it's difficult for you guys probably to find the type of talent that you're looking for. And the other is skill shortage. Then the last one is really it's really a hot market. There's really just a lot of opportunity for folks out there. And so the position that you're hiring for right now, the average recruit might have 10 to 15 other opportunities, whereas yours might have been one of 5, before. So that's why when we get into further conversation about, what do we do now? How do we incent talent? What are they looking for? We can address those points.
I think it might be helpful, and maybe both Katie and Missy, if you want to just kind of touch on what you're doing, Missy, from your perspective, if you've had to make some changes. I know you have like an in-house recruiter. Katie, maybe what you're seeing from different employers, and just what's kind of changed really, say in the last 6 months, the last year, things that maybe have either helped or you've had to kind of adjust based upon, whether or not that's the hiring process for, I've kind of read where larger companies may be at a disadvantage where smaller companies may be able to shorten that hiring process. I had a client of mine last week telling me that they're actually seeing candidates drop off through the process because they've either found something else. So they're having to look to maybe scale that back. So maybe some of the challenges that you're seeing, but also some of the things that you have been doing this kind of work for you.
I'll go ahead and jump in. And yes, Dan, you're correct. Right before, just prior to all the shutdown, we had hired an in-house recruiter. And the one thing that is, not to take away from what Katie does, but one of the things that she does is she implements a lot of the tools and the behind the scenes tools in LinkedIn. And then we, of course, have a system where we advertise our positions too. But what we're finding is that, and particularly with our folks who are being contacted, there's a direct contact going on right now. We're not getting as many responses to our postings as we have in the past. It's more of having to mine for those folks. So to have those connections where you reach out to people in other organizations. So using your network, using your employees network. We also have an incentive for anybody who does a referral for someone that we hire. And it's a pretty lucrative investment for those folks from that standpoint in our investment, because we give $2,500 for referrals, and that doesn't matter what level the position is. So from that standpoint, we're using folks like that. And then the other thing that we're looking at right now too is, as all companies are, is what kind of flexibility do you have? And we've always had a level of flexibility within our firm for when people need to attend to things for their families or whatever, but putting together some type of a formal program and looking into that. We're also doing some things that are fun things in-house, like we have a fitness organization that we work with, and they put challenges in place, and our managing director will give anybody $100 who surpasses his activities during those kind of competitions. So, there's lots of fun things that we're trying to do, but at the same time, you have to be fiscally responsible as well. But we are finding that the recruiting process is a lot more challenging than it has been in the past. And it's very important how you handle them during the recruiting process and then once in-house. And that follow-up with your new hires is really important too, from the standpoint of how was the onboarding process? How have they, are they enjoying what they're doing? Are we measuring up to what we said? And make those types of corrections in the processes that we have if we're not fulfilling exactly what they're seeing.
Yeah, to kind of expand upon a couple of those, Missy, you hit a great point on the kind of the employee buyers market a little bit more so than the employer. And I think we're seeing a pretty big shift than that we have had the power being with the employers in the past. And on some of the job postings that we've seen, there's been more than a 30% drop in applicants, even in the last quarter of this year. So that's kind of some interesting statistics for us, because we kind of thought that a lot of that would shift by this point in the year. So we are needing to be a lot more proactive in recruitment. If you are a company that has job postings out there, whether it's on your own applicant tracking system in-house or on Indeed or LinkedIn, you're likely seeing a lot less traffic on applicants. And then not only is it overall less traffic total, but qualified applicants that are applying to those positions, we've seen an even steeper decline in the right type of candidate applying to jobs. So that then you sit back and you say, okay, well, now what? What do? I still need to fill these jobs, right? So that's where that proactive nature comes in. We talked a lot to our clients about tapping into those employee networks. Not only, I think the referral program is spot on for what should be your first low-hanging fruit right now, but it's also on social media, encouraging your employees to be posting on what available positions are being hired for within their teams or within your organization as a whole. As participants on this forum, hopefully you have a say in kind of some of those hiring practices. So encouraging your employee base to, I mean, even if you make it as simple as write it up for them with a little image and email it to them and say, post this on your LinkedIn, to drum up some, activity and drive some interest. I have a client that, just for an example, he wrote something up and had great humor around the perfect candidate for this role would bring, a dry sense of humor and enjoy a Friday afternoon cocktail. And if these appeal to you, then please apply. So, that creative ability to brand the business a little bit too, I think helps to showcase your team. But leaning into the existing employee base, not just folks that they know, but also their networks online. If you are a company that can enable remote work, I mean, you don't know who in Minnesota or Texas or California might be interested in these roles. So that would be another thing I would, mention as far as a tangible to-do item. And then as far as what else you can be doing to attract people outside of just a immediate opening, kind of goes back to some of the things Missy mentioned related to employer branding. So it's kind of that what have you done for me lately theory on reminding your existing employees and potential applicants on, hey, here's the awesome benefits of working at our company, whether that be that flexible work schedule that Missy mentioned, or the fitness initiatives, or the kind of fun Friday afternoon events. But reminding your employees and potential candidates through whether it's social media posts or just finding those natural ways to kind of insert some of that back into the forefront as a reminder to anybody that's working at the organization or interested in working in the organization, what you have to offer.
One of the things that I heard actually a few years ago, which this kind of ties into the employee branding section, would be, if you are looking for entry-level positions and or just part of the branding is going on college campuses, and you may not be looking to hire many, but you're getting your name out there. So all of a sudden, as we all know, if you've got someone that's probably been in the working industry in a certain field for 5 to 6 years, they bring now a level of experience as opposed to someone out of college, but they may now recognize, they know who you are going back 5, 6 years ago where you may have been on that college campus. So the employee branding, kind of the whole get your name out there. There's a lot of different ways to do that with social media and whatnot. Are you seeing obviously there's a lot of creative things going on out there. I've heard where, and maybe this is more of an entry level where the applicants are getting a gift card just to come to an interview, or obviously, we've all seen signing bonuses, but maybe those signing bonuses, for new hires are coming in, which is, I would imagine, continues to be a pretty attractive thing that's out there. Are we seeing more of that, or is it getting creative? What kind of impact does that have on the current employee base? And I don't know if that, not to touch on just the cost of labor going up because of, that in itself is a major issue.
So from the recruitment standpoint, I'll chime in quickly, and then we are seeing a lot of money being thrown at candidates from a sign-on bonus perspective. And John and Missy will hopefully weigh in on this. I think as an organization, we are torn on whether or not that works. We've seen some big numbers thrown at candidates, and I think we've even heard stories of upwards of $25,000 to $35,000 of a sign-on for some really technical specialized roles. But then the question is, what happens to the existing employee base, and what happens if that employee turns over? What kind of, contractual obligations do they have to the organization? I think there's yet to be seen a little bit about what that long-term impact is. This is kind of a reaction to maybe a desperate employer market in some aspects. I would go back to, I don't think it's a long-term solution, because it's probably going to create some disparate impacts in other ways. What we are seeing is that a lot of employees are considering more than money. Missy kind of alluded to that with the flexibility in schedule. But each employee is kind of determining what's most important to them in their work life, and determining as an employee, as an employer, what can you offer that aligns with the work that you're doing. If you're a manufacturer, you obviously can't have that flexible schedule, right? So I think it's defining what you as an organization can provide, and then how can you appeal to the employee base that is interested in what you are able to offer.
I'd agree with that. And our clients are seeing a lot of sign-on bonus activity, which is really, if you think about it, it's much better financial decision for a company to do a sign-on bonus than it is to have a higher, base comp, because you have to live with that year over year. And so that's a pro for a company to do that. For the employee, it's kind of sexy, right? You get a chunk of cash, up front. And so a lot of recruits find that very attractive. You do need to be careful, and I agree with Katie, if the jury's still out on, whether it's a good strategy or not. I heard there are certain very high demand positions and low supply, such as nursing. And I heard the other day, I was talking to a healthcare organization, and they had about 3 months earlier given a nurse a pretty decent signing bonus. And then 3 months later, that nurse got a better offer from another hospital system, and came back to her company and said, hey, I got this offer. And they said, well, you're going to have to return your sign-on bonus. The company that was hiring her actually covered her original sign-on bonus, plus gave her another sign-on bonus. So there are just certain job titles out there, as Katie was mentioning, that are just in high enough demand that companies are willing to do that. Again, I don't know that that's a really good long-term strategy, but that's the market. That's the market. So.
To what you said too, John, from the standpoint of, living with that higher base salary, that's where when somebody gets a competitive offer from, based on what we've offered them, but it's going to be more advantageous financially to go to them. That's where we sell a lot of our benefits and the types of opportunities that they have here and their growth. But let's face it, to somebody who's a new grad, that doesn't matter very much, right? Because that's not what they're taking to the grocery store to buy their groceries. So from that standpoint, that is where the sign-on bonus helps, because we tell them we're trying to keep equity within our firm. And plus, anytime you add that base and increase that base, you're also increasing all your benefit costs as well, anything that's based on the salary. So, and I agree, it may not be a long-term solution, but it's certainly something that we're seeing. And it's something that I think is going to be there for a while until we see some type of leveling of what's going on in the workplace and in the market right now. But it has been advantageous for us. And the other thing that we do too is for relocation. A lot of companies don't pay any type of relocation anymore, but what we do is we will do a relocation bonus. So in other words, like somebody who's a new grad and you give them $3,000 to relocate from wherever their college is to Kansas City, they can make that a cheap move and keep the balance, because we're not reimbursing them. And plus we don't create all the taxation issues and tracking that we would have to do for the IRS as well. So there's, it can be anywhere. I've heard companies doing anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000. We kind of land on the 3,000 mark for relocation. And obviously, if it's somebody who's more senior, we look at a bigger relocation bonus than that.
Missy, Katie, or John, do you see with a lot of new grads coming out of college, student loans has been been a big topic of discussion. We all know, we've all read about the amount of student loan debt there are. Do you see, or is this something that's being brought up from, especially I'll call newer hires, but even you could have someone that's 30 years old that is just still paying off student loan debts?
We have had that come up, and I would tell you, depending upon what your benefits look like within your firm, the one reason that we have stayed away from it, because the other thing is there's been a lot about, 401k, do you take that, what you would normally do for a match, and maybe give it to them for a 401k or for paying back their student loans. The only time that we've seen a real issue with that is, and we've had some pushback, is, okay, how do you keep what you're offering to all your employees equitable if you single out those new grads and you're giving them a benefit that nobody else has? And so for us internally, we've struggled with that question. And at this point, we've decided not to do that, not to do any type of a payback program. However, the folks who do have our 401k plan, they are advisors. We do refer people to them, and they can help them and guide them through maybe consolidating their loans and helping them get better interest rates. So we're doing it from that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm not hearing much about paying off loans. I'm sure it's happening in a lot of our clients. Where I have heard it is certain higher level, professional type roles, such as, hiring the top, grad school, individual for, a top law firm, or, doctor coming out of residency through a certain big hospital system. I've heard of those situations, but nothing like the sign-on bonus being as broad as that.
Yeah, we haven't seen it become a decision driving factor. If anything, it's kind of the icing on the cake if an employer does offer that, but it's not something that seems to be a driver in a candidate engaging in the interview process. I would say that those drivers are more along the lines of overall benefit offerings, and what else is included in that outside of just the loan portion.
Dan, if I could real quick, you had mentioned earlier about, have we seen any change in the process of hiring? And I just want to make one point is, be really careful of streamlining the process for mid to higher level positions, because the impact of making a wrong decision at a higher level is significant. So a lot of our clients are still investing in significant, for certain higher level roles, assessment processes and those types of things. They're hiring slow, which is a good strategy on higher level positions, and hiring faster on, the lower entry level positions. So I just thought I'd make a comment.
Yeah, that was actually, I was just going to mention that, and I think I mentioned that earlier in our discussion, that is a potential for a smaller company to be able to maybe expedite the hiring process. But like you said, John, you want to make sure they're the right fit, they're a good fit. And in many cases, they may be going through a personality type testing and make sure they match up, from an assessment standpoint with what their responsibilities are going to be with that particular job. I don't know, Kate, if you've seen any changes there. Like I said, one of my clients last week just said, hey, we've actually lost a couple of candidates because of our process. Now, he's talking more of what I'll call an entry level type of position.
Yeah.
Still, I don't know if you've seen any changes there or have had to make maybe some suggestions or recommendations to some of the clients.
And that's been, I think, a big challenge for smaller companies and larger companies alike, really, is candidates ghosting them. And there's a big article, I think, in LinkedIn just today around candidates and this new experience or phenomenon of candidates ghosting through the interview process. And I think they are being bombarded with opportunities, and for some of them it can be overwhelming to manage all of those. I think we all realize it's like a job hiring. it's like a job looking for a job too, right? And so there is something to be said for being efficient in your hiring. I'll echo what John said. There's a risk there too by going too quickly. But what I would say we see from working with a number of clients across different industries is a lack of kind of preparedness and training to make an efficient and quality hiring practice. So I would encourage you, if you are struggling in the interview process and maybe losing out on quality talent, to take a look at, there's kind of the attraction or, you know, recruiting bucket, and then there's that interview bucket. And what are you doing from the time that you get a qualified candidate engaged in your process? How many touch points are you having? How long are those touch points? Who are they talking to in that process? What questions are being asked? What data is being recorded? We really work and we work with our clients on training them on that interview process, because you can really make or break their experience. And you can also make or break your experience, you know, on the back end, if you're doing things the right way and making that hiring decision. So I think it's training and having the right people in the room in the interview process, encouraging them to prepare in advance of those interviews. And then also reflecting afterwards and collecting that right information so that you make efficient use of the interview time. And I don't think there's a magic number. We get the question a lot about how many interviews should there be. I don't know if there's an answer to how many. It's more about the quality of those interviews and having the right people at the table, the right decision makers, to help make the right hiring decision, more than how many times do we need to see their face. So I think there's something to be said for really taking a look at internal hiring practices and ensuring that they are reflecting the best hiring decision possible. And I think everybody on here probably has a pretty good feel for how successful you are in hiring decisions. So if that's a challenge, looking at who's making those decisions and what training might be in place for them to help make better decisions and the candidates you're bringing on board.
You know, Dan, you were talking about assessments, and we did put an assessment in place a couple of years ago, and it's not a knockout type of situation. It's if we hire this person and if they seem to be a good fit, even if they don't necessarily meet the profile to the extent that a lot of people would like to see, what are you dealing with? What do those people need? And how do you need to manage them? And how do they like to be managed? Those are all things that are really important that I think happen with those assessments. And the other thing too, you know, Katie, you're talking about the interview process and staying in touch with those candidates. The one thing that I think that has been really important over the years that I've always done within our HR departments is, if you're not the right person and you know that, call those people. Don't ghost them. You know, you have candidates that ghost you. The thing is, let's not do that to them. We need to get an honest answer back to them. And I would tell you the feedback that we usually get from those folks is they really thank you for actually, and we call them, we don't just send them a letter. And that makes a big difference. I think it also creates, I don't know, a little bit of a concern or consideration for folks that they recognize going forward.
Yep, there's something to be said for picking up the phone. I think that goes a really long way. And one thing that is a challenge in our business, being the middleman between the hiring decisions on the employer side and the candidate, is that honest feedback. But the honest feedback that you can give in why they weren't selected might create a potential candidate down the road for you. And that's one thing we talk a lot to some of our clients about. And this is sort of the future state, maybe a bigger, heavier lift and investment, but where we've seen clients be really successful in today's challenging job market are the ones that have built that pipeline of positive candidate interaction time and time again, whether or not that candidate was hired or offered and declined that offer. They might have gone somewhere else and a year or two down the road said, you know what, I had such an amazing experience with this company in the interview process. They treated me really well. Maybe I should revisit if there's any opportunities for me at their organization now. So I think remembering that it's not that singular moment in time with the candidate. It's the long-term potential opportunity. And you could really create a community promoter of your organization, even if you don't offer them the job, because you created a good experience for them, versus not giving that feedback or putting them through the ringer in the interview process, and then they wouldn't be as likely to highly recommend your company.
You bring up a good point about, the number of people that maybe they were talking to. And I've seen this in organizations where, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so in this department, this department. A lot of times those individuals that are interviewing, it's just more of a process, and they're not a knock on the people doing the interview, but every now and then they kind of come in unprepared, and I'm meeting with John Smith or Sally Jones, whomever, and just kind of a couple generic questions. So I think, if I'm understanding it, maybe employers need to look to say, okay, make sure if you're taking the time that you're asking the right questions, you're doing kind of the necessary, legwork in advance, so that you're not, really, you're getting good questions answered that are more valid. So
I think to the high arching theme of a lot of what we've talked about is creating that employer branding. And underneath that, one of the subtopics in that employer branding is your interview process and the experience that you're creating for the candidates as they're going through the interviews. How prepared are the interviewers? What kind of feedback are you getting? So it's kind of all wrapped up into one big overarching challenge for companies, is creating that employer branding in a way that's going to attract and then retain the right people.
One of the things that, obviously that every company has the challenge in terms of compensation. How much can you pay? If it's an hourly paid employee, how much can we push that hourly rate up? If it's a salary, everybody's competing, and by no means, I'm not an economist, but we're seeing costs going up, inflation is going up, and it's going to most likely continue. So employers are going to have to figure out how can we, if they can, increase their products or goods or their services, and it's a very challenging thing. Missy, I think this might be helpful because, I know Populous. I've worked with you for years. You guys have unbelievable benefits. You know it. The majority of your employees know it. Unfortunately, not all of them know it, but we've also, we've worked with you with benefit statements and stuff, but you may kind of want to just kind of share, the culture you have, because there's times I can always say, Missy, I can save you some money by, reducing, some of your health benefits, but you guys are pretty adamant that we know we have rich benefits. But to a lot of other companies out there, either they may not be able to afford that, but they're always looking at ways to enhance their offerings outside of maybe just the financial wage compensation. But you may want to share some of the things that you guys are doing, kind of building that culture.
Well, you talked about the benefit statements, and we did start those last year. It is a huge undertaking, and it is time consuming for HR departments. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, it really lets people know what you as an employer are spending on your employees. And I said earlier, to some, it doesn't make any difference because the benefits aren't what they're paying for the groceries with. However, when those benefits do come into play, it's a huge savings. So, as far as what we look to do in the future, we do have a very lucrative medical plan. We have no deductible, no co-insurance. It's a very expensive plan from an employer standpoint, but we also have found that is something that is really valuable to our employees as they're here longer, and we have long tenure here. So a lot of folks know about our benefits. But those benefit statements, I would tell you, even if you do something simplistic and don't bring somebody from the outside to do it, if you can at least show them what their value is to us as the employer, and what we do to enhance that. The other thing is, you talk about the retention piece of it too, is not only keeping those benefits in place, but also, if you can help them along the way, as far as an employer, can you absorb, let's say that you have an increase one year, can you help absorb some of that? And how does that impact maybe other financial decisions that you're making within the firm? The other thing too, and not just from the benefit standpoint, but we're finding that just feedback to your employees on a regular basis is huge. You know, it's the 80-20 rule. You spend 80% of your time on 20% of the people, and those 20% of the people are usually the ones that are a little bit more high maintenance than the others. So the fact is that, you know, pay attention to those other 80%, because even little things like a thank you or hey, let's grab lunch and pick up lunch for them that day, or whatever it is, that we are finding that appreciation from a retention standpoint is huge. And there are books out there. I pulled one out the other day. It's old, but it's 1,001 Ways to Reward Employees. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are paying them something. It might be some little thing that you're doing. So from a retention standpoint, I think that's important in addition to those benefits that you offer. But yes, we've always been really high on keeping those benefits in place.
Did you write that book, Missy?
No, I did not. I did not. It was written by Bob Nelson, who's a PhD. Definitely not me. I'm not an author.
Have you guys seen a change with COVID? Obviously, employees now that are working more remote, there's still employees in a lot of companies that are still working remote. You know, it's created a scenario where now you have employees that, hey, they kind of enjoy this flexibility. So now employers are now having to adjust to maybe, hey, you know, you can come in, we'd still like to come in for 2 days, you can work from home 3 days, vice versa. And I think that's probably going to be somewhat of a continued trend down the line. Now, obviously, there's certain jobs, there's certain locations that just you can't work remote. But do you see that changing? And it seems I'm going to throw a couple other things out there from Missy, you kind of hit on a little bit about childcare, but maybe unlimited PTO. We get into maternity and now paternal leave, just different things that, you know, as many employees struggle with increasing the financial compensation and whatnot. These are some additional things that can be added that, you know, a little bit outside the box type of scenario.
Yeah, I'll touch on that, Dan. So, well, Missy was referencing some literature. There is a global study that was published a few months ago. Actually, it's by our parent company. We're owned by the Adecco Group. And as you can download it, it's free. It's called Resetting Normal. And there's a lot of great research on what's happened in the last 18 months and what to do from a retention standpoint. So I just thought about that. But listen, the hybrid workforce is here to stay. It used to be a nice to have to offer, and now it's an expectation. And you know, anyone that's recruiting, you know, right now knows that it's become an expectation. So it's definitely here to stay. But I think there's other things in regards to, you know, PTO, wellness initiatives. Like I mentioned earlier, that's a big issue right now with what people have been through the last, you know, 16 months or so, is, you know, the work stress. And we're seeing, like, when I talk to HR leaders really throughout, you know, the country, believe it or not, the number one thing that's on their mind, if they were to prioritize, is wellness. Soon after that would be, you know, lack of labor, you know, or talent, but wellness is number one. And then you get things like change and, you know, culture, et cetera. So we have to, we can't brush that aside. We got to attend to that. We got to attend to the wellness, because that, you know, it's the right thing to do, number one. And number two, it certainly, there's a connection to productivity and engagement. So, and I guess the last thing I would say is work-life balance. I mean, there's, you know, this time that we're all in, I agree that there's not the great resignation. There is a lot of resignations. There's a very high quit rate, but it's not the great resignation. And we have to start thinking about work-life balance a little bit better than we have. Part of this global study, one of the things that I, first of all, kind of laughed at when I read it, was that globally, 60-something% of people want to go to a 4-day work week. I said that coming out of college. What's up with a 5-day work week? But 63%, and what's behind that is the stress that everybody is under and the lack of resources the past, X number of months. And on average, people are working over 50 hours. And I think the study also mentioned something like 65% of people think that they can get their current job done in less than 40 hours a week. So, maybe start evaluating people on outcomes versus the hours that they spend at work. One thought.
One of the things, and you talk about wellness, John, and through all the COVID challenges we've had for the last year and a half, and we've seen this with a lot of our groups is, EAP programs. Everybody should have an EAP program. If you don't have an EAP program, they're very inexpensive, but they do provide guidance, someone's personal life, whether it be financial, marital, dealing with children, it could be dealing with, an elderly adult. There's all sorts of issues that are out there that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So highly encourage you, if you don't have that part of your benefit mix, to include that. One other thing I will mention is, it's easy to say, as you're looking to hire, a lot of employers, it's from an affordability standpoint, they're really strapped. They can increase their cost of goods. They can increase their cost of services. And I'm not trying to plug Miller Group or myself, but I do think, look hard at your benefits that you're offering. There's a lot of creative things that you can be doing, whether or not you're working with your current broker consultant, that, turn over every rock. And I try to have these conversations and recognizing there's certain employer groups of mine that they're not going to want to make these decisions. That's okay, but we still have some of these conversations, because I have an employer outside of Topeka that are a manufacturer, and they knew they needed to increase their hourly wage to their employees. They run a 24/7. It's a manufacturing operation. So we were able to, they have 220 employees, but we were able to save about $300,000 in their overall employee benefit cost. And the good thing is, we really didn't jeopardize the benefit offering back to their employees. But those are the types of things you got to kind of look at, what opportunities that are out there. One of the, I know we're probably trying to leave the last 10 or 15 minutes to some questions that are coming in from some of our people. One of the questions I have out there is, Missy or Katie or John, some of the names of those assessments that we were talking about earlier, if you wanted to kind of share what some of those assessment programs are that you guys have utilized, that would be pretty helpful.
We use an organization called Culture Index. And we were, and it is something that, by the way, whenever you're using something like that, if we actually post it with our postings, a link to it, because you have to make sure that it's not, you're not discriminating, where you're only giving it to some of the candidates and not the others. So it's part of our application process. And they were one of the folks that we vetted a couple of years ago, mostly for internal use, not externally when we were hiring people, but for how do we build teams and make sure that you have the right combination of people to have a successful team. So, and in the architecture practice, that's really important. If you have someone who is going to require a little bit more attention, or somebody who doesn't realize that about them. But Culture Index has been the assessment program that we've used, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that or give you some information on it. So.
And I'd say, so our firm advises clients more on the leadership level than entry level. So I don't know personally much about entry level assessments. I would say at the leadership level, we use a lot of Hogan. Most HR practitioners know that. There's an assessment now actually that I just took. I had my whole team take it recently, and it's called it measures learning agility, and it's called the Talent X7. There's other learning agilities assessments out there, but I thought it was fascinating. I had the team take it because there's just so much change in the world of work, and the fact that, that businesses are changing at warp speed, and how agile are the learners on my team, and myself. That's really what I wanted to, to understand. Anyway, it's called Talent X7. We took the instrument, and it had a consultant that led us through the debrief in a group environment. I thought it was just really helpful.
Go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, we've helped clients administer the DISC assessment and then the predictive index in the past. I think the most critical thing from, again, a third-party lens is to find one that is authentic and works for your organization. So that vetting process that Missy mentioned, I think, is really critical before just jumping into an assessment for the sake of, oh, we have an assessment, we have some data in our interview process, right? It's got to be the right one. And I think it also needs to be implemented with your existing employee base to kind of make sure you get an understanding of how it's used. So there's a ton of opportunities out there. I think it's just finding the right one for your company.
And I think it's the other thing too that's important is, what are you looking for? Are you looking for people's traits, or are you looking for personality, or are you, what is it? Because a lot of those assessments do different things.
Yep.
Internally here, there was a group that went out and did a free assessment, the Enneagrams. And that was just to find out, personality wise, how people react to things. And that was just something that was out on the internet. So I always say, when you look at those things that are free, the value you get from those is what you invested. So it may give you some information, but it's not necessarily something that's been a tried and true and tested assessment process. The ones that we've all talked about are ones that have been through that process, and there is a cost to them.
One of the questions that has kind of come in is if we can't, as an employer, afford to provide additional benefits, what recommendations or suggestions that you may have, kind of an emergency fund type of the scenario. I can give you actual personal experience here that we provide at Miller Group. So we have what's called Benevolence Fund, and it's a fund that it's a volunteer fund that you can put money into. The Millers will match it 100%, and it's kind of grown over the years that it's now probably a mature fund. But if someone has some financial struggles that they're dealing with, and every employee or every employer has employees that are struggling with day-to-day financial challenges, it's a confidential program where there's a panel of 3 individuals, and I couldn't tell you who the 3 that are on it. It's that confidential. And if someone has an issue, they go to HR and they could submit it, and then they kind of review the circumstances that they're dealing with. And I don't have my exact numbers, but I think they may be able to lend them up to $2,500 or $2,000. And I don't think you're necessarily required to pay this back. But I do think it is a nice gesture, and it's kind of part of the culture where everybody wants to help out, especially those that are maybe struggling. And from time to time, they may have run across, could be a scenario where their car is broken down and they need to spend $3,000, but they only have, $1,000 in the bank, and their priorities are not there. So that's something I know that we do. It's kind of set, and it's my understanding it's worked out really well, and it's completely confidential. So there are different things that employers do. Now, I will say you do have to have pretty good parameters around that, because you don't want to be taken advantage of, and you can't let someone come in every 6 months because they've got financial issues here. But you also have, we've brought in Dave Ramsey to offer up to our employees. We've done things to try to help give them some support and guidance as well. Couple of things. I'll just talk on benefits, as I'm just kind of putting a plug in for some voluntary benefits. If you're an employer out there and you said we can't afford to pay for any more benefits, there are some voluntary benefits that you may want to consider. For example, vision it can be offered as a voluntary benefit, and you're more than likely going to have enough participation. Normally you need 3 to 5 people to sign up, but when you've got a vision monthly employee rate of $10, that same person can go out and get $120 or $125 of contact lens reimbursement. It pays for itself, but it also gives you an opportunity to provide a benefit and the employee that can use it's going to benefit from it. There's some other voluntary benefits that I'm not going to say, hey, you should go out and be offering these voluntary benefits, but make sure you're reviewing what benefits are out there. Even if you as an employer say, hey, we can't afford anymore, there are opportunities to utilize those. There's also opportunities to plug in these benefits that allow you maybe to offset the cost for a bin admin system or something like along those lines. So maybe I'm getting a little off the actual hiring and retention, but benefits is part of that entire program that's out there. One of the questions that has come in, what is your biggest piece of advice to retain current employees? That's a pretty general question, but I think it's a good question.
You know, I think what I said earlier is huge. You know, one of the best things that you can do and say to your employees is that they're valued and you value the work they do and they are contributing to the success of the firm or the company. And to me, that's really important. Anybody who stops by or even, you know, try and get to know people on a personal level too. There's a lot of folks that are going through something, and in HR, a lot of times we know those people who are struggling the most, and literally just to walk up to their desk and ask them how things are going. I mean, later on, usually I'll get an email that says, hey, thanks for checking in. You never know when they're having a rough day or a day where, you know, it's highly stressful, and you tell them, gosh, you are doing a great job and I really appreciate everything that you're doing. But you have to do that with sincerity. It's not a check the box activity. Because I know some folks will say, oh yeah, I need to run around and tell everybody how much I appreciate them. Well, that's not what it's about. It's to have that sincere conversation with your folks. And that's time consuming, but so is recruiting. If they leave, that's time consuming as well.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so many things to do to retain. I'll mention one that you might not think of, and that is how you treat people on the way out.
Yes.
How you're treating people when they're leaving, because those people that call them whatever you want, survivors or whatever, the people that remaining in the organization are watching how you're treating their sometimes family members, friends, or whatever on the way out. Treat them with dignity and respect.
One of the questions that has come in, are there any recommendations for testing at the entry level that help determine how committed or loyal potential hire might be? I don't know if, you know, someone from.
I don't know about any testing. I think one thing I would encourage at that entry level is if you are having a retention issue with folks that are coming in right out of college, trying to collect some data on the folks that are turning over, what's the reason that they're providing? And if you can have those really open and honest conversations, maybe as the HR professional when they are leaving, you know, what is that reason? And determining if there's a theme there, and trying to, you know, address some of those themes that you might see come out. That can be a really hard conversation to collect valuable data on, but I do think there's something to be said around asking questions through the interview process of those entry-level employees that might give you some insight on specific topics that might be a reason for turnover down the road. I don't know if Missy or John has additional insight that might be more tangible feedback, but I think if you can collect some reasoning as to the why behind the turnover, that might help address that earlier in the interview process.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then, you know, as far as, you know, having any type of testing or assessments that would indicate that for you, the only reason would be is if you see something about that testing or assessment that you know is not a good fit for that position. That would be the only thing that I would say, you know, as far as they're being dedicated. Like, for instance, if you're going to hire them for a highly detailed job and they are off the charts the opposite direction from being a detailed person, they're going to be unhappy in the job very quickly. So that would be the one thing, you know, from a testing or assessment standpoint, if you have a good idea of what that job entails. But, you know, Katie, I agree with you. We do that. We have what we call on the record, off the record conversations. And the only thing that I can say about why those work is we do not share the off the record conversations. the off the record conversations do exactly what Katie said, is find out what those trends are. Is it a person? Is it the job itself? Is it, the availability of resources? What is it? And we do not share those. We keep those confidential because, as John said, the way you treat people on the way out, if that person on the way out tells everybody who's still back there, hey, they went to the senior leadership and told them what I said, you're going to lose that ability to glean that kind of information. So
last question, because we need to wrap this up, but two things. One, I'll just point out an exit interview is probably always recommended because you can find out a lot of good things. And if you've got some issues going on, you can probably get some information. You always have to filter whatever that means. And the last question is, someone asked, having a profit sharing program, has this worked well for the retention and recruiting of employees? If you want to, someone just want to answer that, touch on that, and then we need to kind of wrap it up there.
We have a 401k match that we had to put on hold due to the financial impact of COVID. And I will tell you, that's a really important benefit for our folks that are still here. They're really looking forward to that when we put that back in place, and we're hoping to do that soon. But we do keep a profit sharing option in place as well, so that if we do well and we haven't put that safe harbor match back in place in a timely manner, according to regulations, we can use that profit sharing for that benefit for our staff.
I think it's very advantageous, Dan. If I personally was considering two options and everything else was equal, and one had profit sharing and the other didn't, I'd probably lean towards the profit sharing plan or organization.
Well, and I'll just chime in recruiting and trying to go after candidates that might be at a organization that offers profit sharing. We are much less likely to have success luring them away from, their tenure is significantly longer, and there's organizations, I'll tell you, we won't even contact folks at those organizations because our success rate, it tends to be really low just because of that benefit.
Well, I appreciate everybody's participation today. I really appreciate our panel, Katie, John, and Missy, for you guys taking the time. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Amanda here, but I do think, we have gift cards for you, obviously, for your participation, and we really appreciate that. But I think there's some contact information that I'll provide, at least let Amanda let you know how you can contact any of them if you have some questions or maybe want to reach out to them, because I know they all can help you in all the different ways.
Yeah, if following the webinar, either today or tomorrow, you'll receive a follow-up email. It will have some information in there, including a link to the recording and a feedback survey, if you can take 30 seconds to fill that out. And then it will also include the emails for Katie, John, Missy, and Dan. So if you want to have another conversation or have a quick question, they are all happy to speak with you guys. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. That is the end of our webinar today. So thank you, guys. Have a great afternoon.
For the folks at Miller Group, congratulations on 60 years. I saw that
Oh, thank you.
Today.
60 years, November 1st. Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.